Late-night flight cabin hummed softly through darkness, warm lights casting shadows over sleeping passengers throughout aircraft. Row 14. The female CEO in expensive black dress lifted her chin, mocking the quiet man in worn hoodie comforting his 7-year-old daughter. "Keep her quiet. This isn't a public bus." The single father whispered sincere apology, carefully pulled soft blanket over his child. Suddenly, the plane shook violently. Oxygen masks dropped with terrifying metallic clicks. Intercom crackled loudly, captain's voice trembling with fear. "This is your captain. Any experienced fighter pilot on board?" Cabin held collective breath. The quiet man stood slowly. Everything changed. Michael Hale, 35, carried himself with the understated confidence of someone who had learned that actions spoke louder than appearances. European features, short brown hair that refused corporate styling, and a lean frame that suggested physical discipline rather than gym membership. Tonight, he was just another tired father taking the red-eye flight home for his daughter's kindergarten graduation. His clothes told a story of practical choices: worn jeans, comfortable sneakers, and a hoodie that had seen better days but still kept him warm. To most passengers, he looked like what society expected from a single dad struggling to make ends meet. Someone who belonged in economy class, keeping his head down and his voice quiet. 7-year-old Leah nestled against his arm, clutching a small sketchbook filled with crayon drawings of airplanes and clouds. She had been drawing since takeoff, whispering questions about how planes stayed in the sky, why the engines made those particular sounds, and whether the pilots could see stars from the cockpit. "Daddy, why do the wings have those little flaps?" she asked, pressing her nose against the window. Michael's answer came with the precision of someone who understood aircraft systems. "Those are control surfaces, sweetheart. They help the pilot steer through the air, like a rudder on a boat." 3 rows ahead, Aurora Vance checked her platinum watch for the 15th time. At 31, she commanded boardrooms with the same intensity that had built her tech startup into a billion-dollar empire. Her white blazer was wrinkle-free despite the long flight. Her smartphone displayed urgent emails about tomorrow's merger presentation, and everything about her screamed success, power, and impatience. The child's whispered questions grated against Aurora's nerves like fingernails on glass. She had a presentation in 8 hours that would determine whether her company acquired its biggest competitor or lost everything to a hostile takeover. She needed sleep, silence, and the kind of controlled environment that money usually guaranteed. "Excuse me." Aurora turned in her seat, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. "Could you please keep your daughter quiet? Some of us have important work tomorrow." Michael's response was gentle but firm. "She's being very good. We'll try to whisper softer." Aurora's eyes flicked dismissively over his appearance. The scuffed sneakers, the faded hoodie, the obvious signs of someone who probably saved for months to afford these tickets. Her expression said everything. "People like you don't belong in first class. Perhaps next time you could consider booking the family section," she suggested with false sweetness. Michael reached into his backpack and pulled out a piece of paper, quickly folding it into a perfect airplane. He handed it to Leah, who immediately quieted down, fascinated by the precise creases and aerodynamic shape. "Better?" he asked Aurora simply. She turned back to her laptop without acknowledgement, but something in his calm response bothered her. There had been no defensiveness, no anger, just competence. The paper airplane in his daughter's hands wasn't a child's crude folding job. It was engineered with careful attention to weight distribution and wing design. The first sign of trouble came as a subtle vibration through the cabin floor. Most passengers didn't notice, but Michael's head tilted slightly, listening to something in the engine rhythm that had changed. His eyes moved to the ceiling, tracking sounds that didn't belong. A faint electrical smell drifted through the cabin air. A few nervous passengers sniffed and looked around, but flight attendants continued their service with practiced smiles. Aurora laughed mockingly at her laptop screen. "I hope this airline knows how to maintain their equipment." Michael's expression darkened as he continued listening to the engines. Something was wrong. Very wrong. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some technical difficulties with our pressurization system. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. The captain's voice came again, this time with barely controlled panic. Is there any fighter pilot on board this aircraft? Please identify yourself to the flight crew immediately. Michael squeezed Leah's hand gently. Put on your oxygen mask, sweetheart. Listen to everything the flight attendants tell you. He stood up slowly, and every eye in first class turned toward him. Aurora stared in shock as the man she had dismissed as irrelevant stepped into the aisle with the bearing of someone who belonged there. The flight attendant would later tell investigators, he didn't rush or panic. He made sure his daughter was secure before responding to the emergency. His face showed no fear, like he had walked through storms before and knew the way home. Michael approached the lead flight attendant with measured steps, his voice calm and authoritative. I can assist. I'm familiar with emergency procedures. The flight attendant's relief was visible as she escorted him toward the cockpit. Through the partially open door, Aurora could see the captain looking pale and disoriented, while the first officer's hands shook as he worked frantically over instrument panels, displaying warning lights like a Christmas tree of disaster. Light smoke from electrical panels, sir, the first officer reported, his voice tight with stress. Pressurization system failing, and we're getting multiple system warnings. Michael slipped into the jump seat without touching any controls, respecting the chain of command that kept aviation safe. His role wasn't to fly the aircraft. It was to provide the expertise and calm leadership that emergency situations demanded. I'm not type-rated on this aircraft, he stated clearly, but I can assist with checklists, communications, and emergency procedures. He opened the quick reference handbook and began reading emergency protocols in a steady, measured cadence. Confirm breaker positions, isolate auxiliary power, check left pack status, set masks to 100%. His voice created a rhythm that cut through panic like a metronome cutting through chaos. The first officer's hands steadied as he followed each instruction, his breathing returning to normal as Michael's confidence filled the cockpit. Request pan-pan declaration, Michael suggested to air traffic control. If conditions worsen, we'll upgrade to Mayday. Request vectors to nearest suitable airport with long runway and emergency services. In the passenger cabin, Aurora found herself holding Leah's small hand as the child clutched her paper airplane. The little girl had written something on the wing in crayon. For Daddy, you can fly. Shame washed over Aurora like a cold tide. She had spent the evening judging this man, dismissing him as unworthy of her attention, while he possessed skills that were literally keeping them alive. She stood up and began helping flight attendants calm other passengers, using her natural leadership abilities for something more important than quarterly profits. She showed elderly passengers how to position their oxygen masks, demonstrated brace positions, and spoke in the confident tones that had convinced investors to trust her with their millions. Michael's voice came over the intercom, steady and reassuring. Ladies and gentlemen, we're diverting to a nearby airport as a precaution. Please remain calm, keep your masks on, and prepare for landing procedures. Behind the scenes, Michael was orchestrating a controlled response to cascading system failures. The smoke was dissipating as they isolated the faulty electrical module, but multiple backup systems had triggered, creating a complex puzzle of warnings and procedures. Recommend descent to safer altitude, he advised. We're encountering light wind shear, but the runway ahead has favorable conditions, long enough for emergency landing with headwind component. The captain, now recovering from his initial disorientation, resumed control of the aircraft with Michael providing tactical support. The first officer had stopped shaking entirely, drawing confidence from Michael's unflappable presence. Look outside, Michael told the first officer quietly. See the horizon line. We're stable. Everything we're doing is working. In the cabin, Aurora wrapped a flight attendant's spare blanket around Leah's shoulders, her voice gentle in a way she rarely used. Your daddy is very brave. Leah nodded solemnly. Daddy knows about flying. He taught me how to make the best paper airplanes. As they began their approach to the emergency airport, Aurora could see runway lights appearing through the darkness like a constellation of hope. The plane felt steady under Michael's guidance, each procedure executed with precision and calm. The aircraft touched down smoothly, tires squealing against pavement in the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard. Emergency vehicles surrounded them with flashing lights, But the crisis was over. Passengers erupted in applause and tears, but Michael was already focused on the next priority, making sure his daughter was safe and unafraid. The first officer would later tell investigators. His voice was like a heartbeat, steady, reliable, calming. When I listened to him and followed his guidance, I stopped being afraid. He didn't just help us fly the plane. He helped us remember how to be pilots. Aurora remained in her seat, watching through the cockpit door as Michael completed post-emergency procedures with the same methodical care he had shown throughout the crisis. She realized she was witnessing something rare: competence without ego, heroism without fanfare. The paper airplane in Leah's hands had become a symbol of something Aurora was only beginning to understand. There were people in the world who built things, not companies or profits or market share, but safety, trust, and hope. And she had almost missed it entirely because she was looking in all the wrong places. The plane came to a complete stop at the emergency gate, and Aurora knew that when that cockpit door opened, she would meet an entirely different man than the one she thought she had judged so accurately just hours before. Her assumptions were about to collide with reality, and the impact would change everything she thought she knew about worth, value, and what it really meant to be important. The aircraft door opened to reveal emergency crews swarming the tarmac, their vehicles painting the night with red and blue light. Passengers filed out slowly, many still shaken by their brush with disaster. As Michael emerged from the cockpit, one of the fire department supervisors stopped mid-stride, his face registering shock and recognition. "Hale? Major Michael Hale?" The transformation in the emergency responder's demeanor was immediate and profound. He snapped to attention with military precision, and suddenly Aurora understood that she had been sitting next to someone whose identity was far more complex than his simple clothing suggested. "Sir, I served under your command during the Kandahar operations," the firefighter continued, his voice heavy with respect. "You saved our entire squadron that night." Other crew members began gathering, their conversation revealing fragments of a story that Aurora struggled to piece together. Michael had been a fighter pilot, an instructor, and a combat leader whose reputation preceded him even in civilian emergency services. An elderly passenger approached with trembling hands, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Son, you led the formation that pulled us out of that sandstorm in '09. I still have the newspaper clipping." He gripped Michael's hand like a lifeline. "You brought everyone home." Aurora stood frozen, holding Leah's hand as reporters began arriving at the scene. Camera flashes erupted like lightning, and microphones thrust forward like weapons, but Michael immediately stepped in front of his daughter. "Please leave my child out of this," he said firmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The airline's crisis management team descended with practiced efficiency, offering accommodations and collecting statements. The captain emerged from the cockpit, walked directly to Michael, and offered a handshake that looked more like a salute. "Without you, I'm not sure I could have maintained composure," the captain admitted. "You saved everyone on this aircraft tonight." A company representative approached Aurora, tablets and phones creating a digital wall of urgency. "Ms. Vance, the merger meeting has been moved to 8 a.m. due to the flight delay. The board is extremely concerned about the timing." Aurora looked at the tablet, then at Leah clutching her paper airplane, then back at the corporate machinery that suddenly seemed less important than it had just hours ago. "Cancel the meeting," she said quietly. "Ma'am, cancel it. Reschedule. Priority is making sure all passengers have safe connections and proper support." Her assistant looked confused. "But the merger timeline will wait," Aurora said with finality. "Today people come before profits. I'm the CEO and that's my decision." The corporate team exchanged worried glances, but Aurora had already turned away from their concerns. She approached Michael as reporters continued shouting questions he refused to answer. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice barely audible above the airport chaos. "I was completely wrong about you." Michael's response carried no trace of vindication. "You helped keep the cabin calm. Everyone did their part tonight." A retired general, recognizing Michael from news coverage of his military service, made his way through the crowd. He spoke quietly to Aurora as they watched Michael deflect media attention. "Some people are born to be applauded. Others are born to keep the sky steady. You can usually tell the difference by which one they choose when no one's watching." The comment hit Aurora like a physical blow. She had spent her entire career seeking applause, recognition, and the validation that came with being noticed. Michael had spent his life in service that remained largely invisible until moments like this, when expertise became the difference between life and death. Airport security managed to clear the reporters, but not before several passengers shared their stories with camera crews. The narrative was already forming. Mysterious hero saves the day, then disappears back into anonymity. An airport operations manager approached Michael with offers of compensation, upgrade vouchers, and public recognition. Michael politely declined everything except assistance with rebooking his and Leah's connection. "We just want to get home," he said simply. "Leah has her graduation tomorrow." Aurora realized that while she'd been worried about billion-dollar deals, this man had been focused on a kindergarten ceremony that meant everything to a 7-year-old girl who believed her father could fix anything. The contrast burned like acid in her chest. As the crowd began to disperse, Aurora made a decision that surprised even herself. She approached her assistant and gave instructions that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. "Book rooms for Mr. Hale and his daughter at the airport hotel. Anonymous reservation, no publicity, no corporate connection. Just make sure they have a comfortable place to rest. Should I arrange transportation for you to the city? Your presentation materials are secondary," Aurora finished. "Handle the merger calls remotely. I'm staying here until everyone is properly taken care of." Her assistant looked like she was watching Aurora's career implode in real time, but Aurora had never felt more certain of a decision in her life. She walked over to where Leah was showing her paper airplane to a sympathetic flight attendant. The child's innocent pride and her father's skills creating a sharp contrast to the adult world of recognition and reward swirling around them. "Ah, Leah," Aurora knelt down to the child's level. "Would you teach me how to make one of those airplanes?" The little girl's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Daddy taught me. You fold it like this, and this part has to be really straight, and then it flies super far." As Aurora fumbled with paper folds under Leah's patient instruction, she realized she was learning more than origami. She was discovering what it meant to value people for who they were, rather than what they could do for her. The paper airplane she created was lopsided and imperfect, but Leah clapped her hands with genuine delight. "It's beautiful," the child announced. "Now you can make sunshine on dark days too." Aurora looked at the crooked airplane in her hands, then at the patient man who had raised such a remarkable daughter while carrying burdens and responsibilities she was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow's headlines would focus on the dramatic rescue, but Aurora knew the real story was quieter and more profound. Sometimes the most important people in the room are the ones you almost overlook entirely. And sometimes, changing your perspective changes everything else. The airport hotel provided a sanctuary from the media circus that was already spinning the emergency landing into headline news. Aurora had arranged adjoining rooms, not as a gesture of corporate largesse, but as a genuine attempt to ensure that Michael and Leah could rest without intrusion. The next morning arrived with soft sunlight filtering through hotel curtains and the distant hum of aircraft engines that sounded peaceful rather than ominous. Aurora appeared at their door carrying 3 cups of hot chocolate and a nervous smile. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, offering the drinks like a peace treaty. Leah ran to accept her cup, then surprised Aurora by pulling out another paper airplane from her backpack. "This one's for you to keep," she said solemnly, "for when you have scary days." Aurora accepted the small gift with the reverence of someone receiving a medal of honor. She examined the careful folds, noting how perfectly aligned each crease was, how much thought had gone into its construction. "Can you teach me to make a better one?" Aurora asked. "Mine last night was pretty terrible." What followed was an impromptu lesson in paper engineering, with Leah as the patient instructor and Aurora as the eager student. Michael watched quietly, sipping his coffee and observing Aurora's transformation from corporate executive to attentive pupil. "The secret," Leah explained with 7-year-old wisdom, "is that every fold has to be exactly right. Daddy says airplanes are like promises. They only work if you're really careful with them." Aurora found herself thinking about all the promises she had made and broken in pursuit of business success. all the careful details she had overlooked in favor of speed and efficiency. Michael spoke quietly as they worked. Leaving the cockpit was the hardest decision I ever made, but staying home with Leah is the most important mission I've ever accepted. His words carried no regret, only the quiet confidence of someone who had chosen purpose over prestige and found peace in that choice. Aurora set down her coffee cup, her voice thoughtful. I used to think my value was measured in company valuation and market share. I've spent so many years flying high that I forgot what the ground looked like. She looked at Leah, who was carefully adjusting the nose of Aurora's latest paper airplane attempt. Maybe I've been flying too high to see what really matters. They walked together to a small grassy area beside the airport's secondary runway, where departing planes created a gentle backdrop of purposeful noise. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of jet fuel and possibility. Leah launched her paper airplane with the enthusiasm of a child who believed in physics and magic in equal measure. It soared in a perfect arc before landing gently on the grass. Aurora followed with her own attempt, still imperfect, but much better than her first try. The airplane wobbled but flew, earning encouraging applause from Leah. "You're getting better," the child announced. "Pretty soon you'll be able to make ones that fly as far as Daddy's." Aurora found herself apologizing again, but this time the apology was different. "I'm sorry I judged your father before I knew who he really was. I was looking at the wrong things." Leah considered this with the seriousness that children bring to important conversations. "Daddy says people are like airplanes. You can't tell how good they are just by looking at them on the ground. You have to see them fly." The wisdom in those words hit Aurora harder than any business advice she had ever received. She pulled out her phone and began making calls, not to reschedule the merger meeting, but to implement changes that had been growing in her mind since the previous night. "I want to establish a family travel assistance program," she told her surprised staff. "Emergency rebooking, accommodation support, priority assistance for traveling families during flight disruptions." She caught Michael's eye as she continued. "And I want to revise our company's family leave policies. Flexible schedules for employees with children. Sometimes the most important flight is the one that gets you home." That evening, as they prepared for their rescheduled departure, Leah asked Aurora a question that would echo in her mind for years to come. "Are you still scared of flying?" Aurora looked at the paper airplane Leah had given her, now carefully stored in her laptop bag like a talisman. "Yes," she answered honestly. "But now I have something to remind me that the best pilots are the ones who keep everyone safe, not the ones who fly the highest." She had learned that true leadership wasn't about soaring above others, but about helping everyone reach their destination safely. The second flight would be routine and uneventful, but Aurora would never again look at fellow passengers as distractions or inconveniences. She had discovered that the most valuable people are often the ones you might overlook entirely, and that heroism comes in many forms, most of them quiet, humble, and completely unconcerned with recognition. If you believe that a single decision to value people over profits can save more than just a difficult day, comment, "I believe." Dawn broke gently over the airport terminal, painting the waiting area in soft pink and gold light. Aurora opened her laptop bag and found 2 paper airplanes nestled beside her business documents. One from Leah, and the imperfect one she had made herself under a child's patient guidance. Attached to Leah's airplane was a small note written in careful crayon letters, "For your scary days." Aurora looked around the departure lounge and spotted Michael helping Leah tie her shoelaces, his movements unhurried and precise. There was something profound in his patience, in the way he gave his full attention to small tasks that mattered to his daughter. She approached them as boarding began, her heart carrying a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. "If you two need someone to share the journey," she said quietly, "I'd like to travel at the same altitude from now on. Not the high-flying kind, the kind where you stay close to the ground, where real people live." Michael paused in his shoelace tying, then looked up with that steady smile she was learning to recognize. "Ground level can be a good place to fly, closer to the people who matter." Leah bounced with excitement. "Does that mean we get another paper airplane in our family?" Aurora's throat tightened at the word family, not because it was wrong, but because it felt more right than any business merger she had ever negotiated. "If you'll have me," she whispered. The boarding process became a celebration of small connections. Leah insisted on sitting between Aurora and Michael, her paper airplane collection spread across their tray tables like a fleet of possibilities. As their plane lifted off smoothly into morning sky, Aurora realized she was no longer afraid of flying. She had learned that the best pilots don't seek altitude for its own sake. They seek the elevation that allows them to navigate safely and bring everyone home. The flight attendant on this leg would later tell colleagues there was something different about that family in row 12. The little girl was teaching the woman how to fold paper, the man was reading quietly, and all three of them looked peaceful, like they belonged together. During the flight, Aurora found herself looking out the window, not at the height they had achieved, but at the landscape below. Farms and cities and roads connecting people to the places and relationships that mattered most. She pulled out her phone and wrote an email to her board of directors. "The merger can proceed, but with new conditions. Our company will prioritize employee welfare, family support, and sustainable growth over maximum profit extraction. We're changing our flight plan to focus on bringing everyone along, rather than just reaching the highest possible altitude." Michael glanced at her screen and nodded approvingly. Good navigation requires knowing your destination and caring about your passengers. Leah announced that she was going to teach Aurora to draw airplanes when they landed, and maybe they could visit the aviation museum together, where Michael sometimes volunteered on weekends. "You can learn about all different kinds of flying," Leah said seriously. "Daddy knows about the fast kind, but I think you might like the kind where you stay close to people." As they began their descent, Aurora realized that this journey had taught her something no business school had ever covered. There are people who don't need the sky to prove they know how to fly. They keep the sky steady by keeping the hearts of others steady. The plane touched down smoothly, and Aurora knew she was arriving not just at a destination, but at an understanding that would guide every decision she made from this day forward. Some stories end with soaring achievements and public recognition. Others end with quiet connections and the profound satisfaction of choosing people over performance metrics. This was the better landing. True leaders don't need the highest altitude to prove their worth. They keep everyone grounded in what matters most, not by limiting dreams, but by ensuring no one flies alone. If you believe that stories like this one, quiet, persistent, and real, deserve to be preserved, leave a comment below and subscribe so you won't miss the next journey that touches hearts instead of breaking them.